I'm not doing very well in my classics TBR. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney, and this is my mid-year check-in on my classics TBR for 2022. So I did a video in I think like November or December of 2021 with a list of all the classics that I wanted to try to read in 2022. I also did a video about all the Shakespeare's plays I wanted to read in 2022. I'll link both of those in the descriptions if you want to check them out. And now I'm going to tell you how I'm doing on those lists. And the answer is not great. I'm going to start by saying that in July and August, I would like to read My Antonia by Willa Cather, The House of Spirits by Isabel Allende, and The Aeneid by Virgil. So those three books are on my TBR to try to read in the next 2 months. I did start My Antonia yesterday, and the beginning was so beautiful. I already highlighted 2 lines, and I almost never highlight my books. That's just something I don't do. But I highlighted them because they were so wonderful that I'm considering like buying a piece of art on Etsy that has these lines on them because I love them so much. I don't have any plans to read or listen to any Shakespeare plays in the next 2 months. I did really enjoy the ones that I already listened to, but it's definitely something I like to do when it's cold out and I'm like stuck in the house, and not something I'd like to do when I'm out walking because I find Shakespeare kind of hard to follow when I'm outside. My original TBRs had 10 classics and 5 Shakespeare plays. And so far I have read to completion 3 classics and 2 Shakespeare plays. So I'm about a third of the way done. We're gonna start with the classics. So I did start 4 classics, but I only completed 3. So we'll start with the ones I completed and then we'll talk about the 4th one. The first one I read was The Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really thought-provoking and very well written. It's not really a Jane Eyre retelling, which is how it's always been billed, but it's basically like a prequel to Jane Eyre told from the point of view of Bertha, Rochester's first wife, who's like the mad woman in the attic in Jane Eyre. It's about her childhood, her teen years, her early marriage to Rochester, living in Jamaica right after slavery has been abolished, and she's the daughter of a slave owner, and how she doesn't really have a place on this island. She doesn't have a place in England. She doesn't fit in anywhere. She's kind of this like person without a community, and then you watch her slowly go mad. The writing in this book is fantastic. I read this book, I think, in like 2 days. I read it in January. I put my chair right next to my fireplace behind me, had a fire going, and it was lovely. I really recommend this read if you're looking for something that's like a little bit more experimental in terms of like the language and the linear plot and a non-linear plot, but you don't have a ton of time to maybe read Finnegan's Wake or something like that, because it is a relatively short read and a very good one. The next classic I read was The Quiet American by Graham Greene, and I did enjoy this one a lot. The End of the Affair by Graham Greene is one of my favorite classics. It kind of vies between first and second, depending on my mood. But while I really enjoyed The Quiet American, I do think The End of the Affair is a superior book. The Quiet American takes place in Vietnam during like the beginning of the American occupation that leads to the American involvement in the Vietnam War. Our narrator is Fowler, and he's a British journalist who's covering everything that's happening in Vietnam. And he is telling the story of Pyle, who's an American who has come there. And they're both in love with the same woman. Fowler is married, but he has like this marriage where they don't love each other and they're kind of just stuck together. And Pyle is single and wants to marry this woman and basically like take her back to America. We'll say this book was kind of slow getting into it, but the end was phenomenal. So Graham Greene's strong point is writing people who are unhappily in love. I think he does that really well. If you're interested in books that take place during the Vietnam War, at the beginning of the Vietnam War, if you're interested in sort of like international relations, I think you'd really enjoy this book. And the last classic that I have finished so far this year is Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. It was my last Austen to read. It wasn't one of my favorites. I'd actually put it at like 5th place if I ranked all my Jane Austens, which I did a video about that. I'll pop it in the description in case you're interested in that. Northanger Abbey tells the story of Catherine Morland, who is kind of like a wide-eyed innocent. She gets to go to Bath with a family friend and see what society's about. It's very tongue-in-cheek and sarcastic. And I loved the beginning of the novel in which she meets Isabel Thorpe, who's like her new best friend, and she has no idea what's going on in Bath and how society works. I thought the middle of the book dragged a little bit, but by the end I was back into it. Mr. Tilney's a very fun hero. The gothic, ghost story-ish feeling of Northanger Abbey is a lot of fun to read either in the fall or winter, which is when I would recommend to read it. And it was fun. I had a good time reading it. Now, the one classic I started but didn't finish is Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. I read, I think like the first 75 pages of this. I got it from the library and I was having a really hard time getting into it. And I think I had it checked out for like 2 months and then finally decided I just needed to return it, and then I'll find it at Half Price Books at some point and then go back to it. I've been to Half Price Books since then. They did not have it, but I'll just keep checking every time I go there and see if I can find a used copy. I really liked the prologue to that book, but then when you get back into the book, you like jump to a different point in time, which I didn't find as engaging. But hopefully when I give it another try, I will be more into it than I was this time. All right, let's move on to my Shakespeare plays. If you had watched my original video that I linked below, I talked about the 5 Shakespeare plays I wanted to read this year, and they were The Winter's Tale, Julius Caesar, All's Well That Ends Well, Much Ado About Nothing, and As You Like It. So we have a romance, a tragedy, and 3 comedies. I read The Winter's Tale in January, and I absolutely loved it. It's immediately one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. It's really cool how it's set up. It's very different. So the first 3 acts are basically a Shakespearean tragedy, and if you ended the play at the end of Act 3, it would be a Shakespearean tragedy. But then the play goes on for 2 more acts and kind of is like a comedy for 2 acts, which I really enjoyed. We also have a big time jump between acts 3 and 4, which makes that possible. The premise is that we have a king who suddenly gets caught in a fit of jealousy and thinks his wife has had an affair. And so she's pregnant at the time. He condemns her to death and condemns the child to be abandoned. And that's how we end Act 3. So you could see, that being pretty bad ending to a play. But then we jump ahead to the child having grown up, and now she is in love with this prince from another land whose father was accused of having an affair with the king's wife. It's a mess, but it's a fun mess because it's a fun Shakespearean mess. I both read and listened to this, and I listened to the BBC Shakespeare sessions, and the cast was phenomenal. So if you want to read / listen to The Winter's Tale, I'd really recommend this recording because it was a delight. There is one scene in Act 4 that is hard to follow if you are not reading along. So I would say Act 4 is the one act that you really want to have the play in front of you as well, just so you know who's talking, because there's like a huge party. And I was in the car listening to that part, and that was a little difficult. Next, I read and listened to Julius Caesar. And I liked this play. I didn't love it. I mean, I was coming off Winter's Tale, which I loved so much, so I didn't think it was going to stand up to that. But I did think it was a really well-written play. There were so many good monologues. There's a lot of great lines in it. I went through a phase in my life where I was really into Roman history, so I already knew the story pretty well and a lot of the characters, but I do think Shakespeare really adds, his Shakespearean flair to the story of Julius Caesar. I could see this being a really fun play to watch on stage just because of like the political intrigue that goes through it. I did a video in which I ranked my Shakespearean tragedies, and I did put this one last. Not to say I didn't like the play because I really liked it a lot, but I just really love Shakespearean tragedies so much. Like I would put every tragedy I've read in front of Twelfth Night, The Tempest, both the histories I've read, Taming of the Shrew. I just really like the tragedies. So that's the only reason it's low, because it wouldn't be my last Shakespearean play by far. So I'm doing a little bit better on my Shakespeare TBR than on my Classics TBR. I've got 3 out of 10 classics read, and I have 2 out of 5 Shakespeare plays read. I'm hoping by the end of the summer I will have upped my classics number to 6. My Shakespeare number, I'm really not expecting myself to read any more Shakespeare until my children go back to school and it's a little bit quieter around my house so I can focus on reading Shakespeare. It's much easier to, sit in the backyard and read My Antonia than to try to read Much Ado About Nothing. Have you been reading any classics this summer? If you have and you've made it to this far in the video, please tell me in the comments what you've been reading, what you've been liking, what you've been thinking is meh, and what you've been thinking is terrible. So I can avoid it. As always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. See you soon.